Hey guys, if you're enjoying the content I've been putting up, be sure to subscribe so you always know when a new video pops up. Now that we got that part out of the way, let's get into the video. Final Fantasy XIV is a massive game with thousands of hours of content. What I'm going to do here is break down some of the major plot points for those of you who want to know more about Eorzea, but may not have time to experience it all firsthand. This time, we're jumping into the story of Eden's Promise. Now that the Scions are back on the Source, you take a trip to the First to check on Rean, Gaia, and the Empty. Ironically enough, you arrive right when Yalfred and the others are planning another trip into the Empty. But before you set off, he lets Gaia know that they've been making progress with finding out about her past, but she's not as happy about it as you might think. She's actually enjoying hanging out with Rean, and learning about her past may ruin that. Plus, she's more interested in learning about her odd powers and the weird voice in her head than whatever she used to be in Yulemore. So the three of you head off to the Empty, where Gaia surprises you all by revealing that she's learned to drive the Sky Slipper so she can chauffeur you two around. On the ride, Rean catches you up on what they've been doing while you were away. They finally got their coffee biscuits, which are delicious, and they made a necklace out of the piece of ice that came from the time Rean turned into Shiva and tried to kill you. And there's even a festival that the kids at the Crystarium are setting up to help the adults take their minds off of the stress of readjusting to the new changes you brought to the First by restoring darkness. It's very reminiscent of the Garden Festival that Sophie put on Final Fantasy VIII. The ride is pleasant, but once you arrive in the Empty, Rean is horrified to see that the plants that were growing in the area when you left have started to die. The strange crystal that none of you actually know what it does aside from changing color every time you restore an element seems to be taken over by light ether. Gaia thinks that when Rean had lost control of the ether during her attempt to control Shiva's powers, she had unbalanced the elements despite Gaia holding back the darkness. The voice of the fairy returns to Gaia suddenly, screaming at her to restore the darkness before it's too late. The words give her an idea. With the light ether overflowing, channeling dark ether should be able to balance it. Of course, that means you'll have to pummel the primal that gets summoned. Again. There's just one small problem. There are no dark primals. Rean thinks about the Ascian's god Zodiark, but it'll be better to summon something that you know wouldn't one-shot you, and nothing said that what you summon has to be a primal. It just has to be filled with dark ether, kinda like a void scent. And you fought a few of those that fit the criteria, but none would be better than the Cloud of Darkness. By combining the powers of the Oracle of Light and Darkness, the pair should be able to summon the Cloud of Darkness without you having to fly Eden anywhere, although Gaia is pretty sure something's gonna go wrong. However, Rean tries to cheer her up by talking about all the snacks that they'll have at the festival that, for some reason, Gaia has no idea about, despite the fact that you all talked about it on the way there. And chalking it up to the fact that she was trying not to crash you into anything on the ride over there, the two kids get to work on summoning the Cloud of Darkness. Once again, you focus your thoughts and use your memories to summon the cloud, and she looks even less like the original than your other attempts. Kinda want to know what goes through the Warrior of Light's mind when people tell him to, think. This version is 1,000 times more brutal than the one you fought at the Crystal Tower, but after being blown up, dropped off a cliff, and battered in unbelievable ways, you bring it down and you all head outside to see if your hard work paid off. The plants are still dead, but the weird crystal finally seems stable, but Gaia feels like something's wrong. Very, very wrong. The voice of the fairy returns, claiming that it's been waiting 100 years for this moment, prompting Gaia to realize that it's been hiding inside of Eden all of this time. The sky ripples and you finally see what, or who, has been talking to Gaia her entire life. An Ascian named Mitron. Your actions have freed him from his prison of light, and with a shocking bit of deductive reasoning that would have made Eorzea proud, Rean figures out that Mitron wasn't hiding inside of Eden, but he is Eden. Eden is an Ascian that was transformed into a Sin Eater. Gaia is a little bit upset to learn that restoring the darkness was Mitron's idea and not hers, but he hadn't forced her to do anything. He'd only suggested it, and she'd gone through with it on her own, giving him the ability to leave the body he'd been trapped in for a century. And he's thankful to Gaia for her help, although he knew she'd come for him. He knows her very well, and once he restores her memories, she'll know him too. When the 13th shard was flooded with darkness, the First, being the world most connected to it, felt the effects the most. It was unbalanced in a way that made it easily overcome by light ether, If that happened, it would become as useless to the Ascians as the 13th, so they put extra effort into keeping the world from being flooded with light. Selk came up with a plan to jumpstart the rejoining of all the shards with the source by using the light that the Ascians had worked to keep back, and he had given the job to Mitron and his allies, but they were beaten by Ardbert and his friends. Death isn't permanent for Ascians in most cases. Their souls just go back into the rift until they find a new body. But before Mitron's soul could leave, Ardbert stabbed it with a sword made of pure light, and it mutated him into Eden. The pain was unbearable, and then he couldn't even think anymore. His instincts took over, and they latched on to Ardbert's desire to banish darkness, causing him to unleash the full force of the light built up inside of him. It would have consumed the entire world had Minfilia not stopped the flood. Her actions gave Mitron a bit of his consciousness back, but he couldn't move. He could only whisper and hope someone could hear him. Selk could have saved him, but he wouldn't risk disturbing the balance of ether. So Mitron called out to the only person who he knew would help him, Gaia. The voice she had been hearing her entire life had been pleading for help, but since she had forgotten him and everything about who she was, she didn't know. And without that knowledge, she could only use a fraction of her power. When you restored darkness to the world, it made Mitron stronger and let him take more direct control of Gaia, which is what had brought her to Eden. He had brought her there to free him, but you stopped it when you had fought her. But your attempts to fix the empty by having Eden absorb ether slowly helped him break free, and now he's able to project his mind outside of Eden, although he's still trapped inside. The story is interesting, but Gaia still doesn't understand what it means about her. Mitron decides to show her once she goes back to Eden's core. Reen's reluctant to do anything that the fairy told Gaia, and now knowing that it's an Ascian, she's even less likely to trust it. On top of that, she no longer has control of Eden, so going into the core could be terrible, but she doesn't know what to do. As long as Mitron is absorbing all the ether you gathered, the empty will never be restored. She wishes Thancred and Urianger were there, but in a shocking turn of events, Gaia no longer has any idea who they are. It seems that Mitron is stealing her memories, meaning that if you want to help Gaia, you'll have to deal with him. So you head to the core, where he decides to use Eden to recreate the events of 100 years ago, to show you what happened when Ardbert and the others faced off against the Shadowkeeper, kinda similar to the way Selk recreated Amaurot. All of this is so he can show Gaia who she really is, but Reen warns her not to trust anything he says. When Gaia decides to listen to you instead of him, he snaps, yelling at Reen for corrupting his friend before he decides to teleport Gaia away to start restoring her to her true self. And he's going to make you help by forcing you to face off against the Shadowkeeper. And that's where we're going to stop for today. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the final part of this story.